Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop on survey design. We are really excited to have you here. Today's workshop is not a typical research workshop because it is going to be fun, engaging, and little unconventional. If you have followed Dr. Kirsten, you would know she's not a typical researcher. Even her tagline on LinkedIn says she's the cool researcher out there. So how did I find her? While I was looking into on socials, who is actively creating content on designing surveys? And it is Kirsten. Her unique approach to research with a sense of creativity, personal touch, what caught my eye. And then I invited her, why don't you come and teach our community how you can create quality surveys? So that's how I met Kirsten. A brief background on Dr. Kirsten. She has worked with 22 plus organizations, over 150 entrepreneurs she has helped to date. She is the founder and CEO of Kirsten Lee Hill Consulting, where she has worked with many organizations, extensive experience in survey design, program evaluation, and research. And even one of her projects got funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's also an affiliated assistant professor at University of Delaware, where she leads groundbreaking research efforts. She is here to transform your surveys and help you make data-driven decisions. Kirsten's work is all about leveraging traditional expertise for greater good. Today, she is here with us to share all the knowledge she has on survey design and help to make research work for you. Over to you, Kirsten. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Wilson. Can you give me screen share permissions, possibly? That would be lovely. And thank you for that introduction. Everyone, I'm so excited to be here. I'm honored that people signed up to do this. I love nerding out over survey design and teaching it. So I'm, just thrilled. So I'm gonna share my screen because I have a few things for us to look at together. And the first context that I wanted to give was typically when I teach survey design, it's like a 2-day, 8-hour course. So it's like long and we cover a lot and there's lots of time for practice. And when I talked to Wilson, it was like, okay, let's design just like a 1-hour survey power hour to get people started with good design practices. So teaching you as much as I can in an hour that will actually be actionable. My goal is for you all to really have just like a foundation in survey design so that when you leave after this hour, you can start asking better questions. I like to start every course I teach with just revisiting why good survey design matters. And I do this by looking at examples of bad survey design. So I've pulled 2 survey questions today for us to look at together. The first one is from a company called Quoted. They kind of like matchmake experts with people who are writing online articles and news responses. And they sent out this survey. This was 2 years ago now, because like many organizations, they wanted to know, how do you first learn about us? So like the purpose behind the survey, I get it. They want to know where people are hearing about them so that they know where good ad dollars are spent, where they might need to dedicate more time. This is the question they sent out. Can you still see my screen?
Nope.
No, it's like something just happened, Wilson. I lost control.
That usually happens when you're designing a survey.
I was like, I can't see. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
All right, great. Okay, so does anyone just looking at this question have thoughts on why I think this is a bad question?
Is it too many answers, options?
That's a good thought. It does have a lot of options to read through. Social media is online. Yes. Tracy, yes. Yes, Sandra, option choices combine how and who. Drives me crazy. Amazing. These are good. So I did a little markup of this question. Right off the bat, colleague is a who, not a how, right? And the reason that that matters is because you can only pick one choice. So typically if you see a survey and there's like a circle, you can pick one. And if you see a square, you can click as many things as you want. You can only pick one thing here. Your colleague could have emailed something to you. They could have sent you something through social media. They could have talked to you at an event, right? So colleague is not a how at all, it's a who. And so that makes it overlap with all of these other choices. And as you dig into these and look at these a little more closely, you'll actually see that a lot of these choices overlap. Because if you hear something through an ad, that ad could have been on social media. That ad could have been something that was emailed to you, right? An email is online. I don't even know what online/advertising is. Like, we're combining two completely different things in that choice here. So when they get this data back, it's just not going to be very accurate or usable. And to me, the biggest offense right here is the through social media, where they group together three completely different platforms. Because you can imagine, if you're a business owner, you work for an organization, where you're putting any money and time onto social media, you would want to know which platform are people hearing about you on. They're only going to know, like, hey, I heard about you on social. Is it because my Facebook ads are finally counting for something? Is it because some people are still on Twitter and that's where they're seeing about us? They have no idea based on this question, which is a problem, because you're asking the question because you want to get good, useful information. They are not getting that from them. If we were to redo this question, I would split it into two, right? You could say, how did you hear about Quoted? I always make this a check all that apply. It is unlikely that I have heard about you from only one place, but if I did, I can just check one thing, that's fine. But if I heard about you from a bunch of different places, don't you want to know all those places that are talking about you? I know I would. So how did you hear about us? Check all that apply. And then if I click add, I can see the second question. And this you would customize to where you actually have ads, right? Like, if you're not running ads on Google, don't put Google as an option, because you know you don't have ads there. But this would be a second question that comes up based on how I respond to your first question. This makes for much more clear, accurate data. It's like a little more work because, yes, now you have two questions instead of one, but the information is so much better. And here, what I did to make the who more of a how is that, like, how did you hear about us? It was a recommendation, right? Because recommendation is more of the vehicle. We don't tie colleague into there. I don't really care if it's from a colleague or a friend. If you did care about that and I clicked recommendation, you could have a follow-up that says, hey, who recommended us? Was it someone at work? Was it a friend? Was it a family member? The idea is you kind of want to funnel people in to see how they heard about you. And then if you have additional questions about that, ask those after. Does anyone have any questions about this example before I go on to just one more example?
Just one quick one. You can replicate the logic with the others as well, right?
Yep.
So newsletter, if you have different newsletter, like add on which newsletter are you following, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that's it. Just
Yeah.
an additional. We're good. Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a question that I got from Apple. I had needed help with my iPhone, and after I talked with someone, they texted me this question: how would you rate our specialist who helped you? I could give them a 1, which meant poor. I could give them a 5, which meant excellent. This is all they wanted to know after our whole conversation. Does anyone have thoughts on why I do not like this question, which is common? It's not just Apple that's using this. A bunch of people use something similar to this.
There's no indication as to what the reasoning that you chose to make those evaluations.
Yep, absolutely. This is like a big, super generic question. And my friends who work in customer service always point out that what's unfortunate about this is this can be used for things like whether or not someone gets a raise or whether or not they get promoted or if they're losing money, right? And it's all just based on this one rating question from poor to excellent. So when I look at this, there's a few things that jump out to me. One is I'm always on the lookout for language that seems a little advanced. Like, my goal for a survey is that anyone who's reading this knows exactly what I'm asking about. When I was chatting into Apple, they didn't call anyone I was talking to a specialist at any point in that whole conversation. Specialist is more advanced language. I would not use that word in a survey. I would want to use something more clear. The only reason I would put in something like specialist, if that is actually like the person's title, and in that conversation I learn their title, then it's fine. That's okay. When it asks me to rate, it doesn't tell me to rate on what, right? Like, again, this is just like a big overly generic rating question. Like a lot of times I talk to customer service representatives and they're so nice, but they're not helpful at all. So like, how do I rate them? Do I rate them a 4 because they were really nice, but not that helpful? Do I rate them a 1 because they didn't help me at all? There's too much going on here, right? And on a similar note, if for some reason the specialist gets an average rating of like a 2, what does that mean? Like Apple doesn't get that and say like, okay, so we need to train them to know more about features, or we need to teach them to have better conversational skills or be more friendly. This is what I would consider not actionable information at all, because you get the numbers back and I don't know what to do with it because I don't know what it means. To the person who suggested, like, it's just not specific. Like we have no idea what this means. Helped, this is kind of what we consider like a leading question. Like it says they helped you, they might not have helped you. You would want to use like neutral language, like how was your experience with this person? And I personally, this is a contested point, so it's not everyone will agree with me. I don't like to leave numbers in most cases without an explanation, right? Like it defines 1 as poor, it defines 5 as excellent. I would want to know what a 2, 3, and 4 means, because I want to make sure that when I take this survey and assign someone a 4, that means the same thing as when Wilson takes the survey and assigns someone a 4. And because 4 isn't defined, it makes it harder to do that. So the lack of like super clear response choices here is an issue. If I were to ask someone to give feedback on customer support, I like something that's like easy like this. So which of the following describe your experience with the Apple support person you recently talked to? You can select all that apply. I give a none of the above option if none of these apply, because you want to cover the full range of responses. And then I have things like they solved the problem, they were easy to understand, they were friendly, they replied quickly. Like these are the things for me and my company that I would care about. If they don't click that they're solving the problem, now I know like whatever this person phoned in about, I need to make sure people are more trained in that. If they don't click that they were friendly, I know that we need to have a conversation about how to communicate with customers. This is giving you actionable information. And that's really the lens through which I look at all survey questions. You want to be able to take action based on the data you get. And you're not going to take action on data that you don't trust, or that is confusing, or that if people are looking at the survey question, they're like, I actually have no idea how to answer it. I don't know what it means. So focus on like, can I actually use this information? Any thoughts or questions about this example? Cool. So to dive into the more formal learning portion of this, I teach about 5 steps that you can take to design a good survey. And so for me, a lot of times survey design goes wrong right from the beginning. So we're going to focus in on steps 1 and 2, because these are really going to frame up how you actually draft your survey questions. So getting clear on your goals and always starting with the who. So I like to tell my clients to write a survey purpose statement, which can sound overly simple or like silly to do, but the number of surveys I see where people have clearly not thought about who they actually want to take the survey is wild to me. Like they're using language that wouldn't make sense to everyone, or they're putting a survey out on the internet and anyone can take it and they're not capturing any information about the people who answer your question. I had a friend the other day who did a survey. She owns a fashion company. She wants to sell to women who are between the ages of like 20 and 40. And she put a survey on TikTok. And I looked at the survey to see what kind of questions they had. And there were no questions to capture any of the like age, gender, like demographic information of people taking the survey, which means she could be making decisions based on people who are not her ideal client. You don't want to make decisions based on people who are not your ideal client. If I only sell to people who are women in their 40s, then I don't necessarily care what women in their 20s think about my product because I'm not selling to them, right? But I have to know who's taking my survey in order to make those decisions, right? In order to understand how to interpret my data. So this is where I start with everyone, like, give your survey a name. It could be like customer feedback survey, whatever, it doesn't matter. And describe who you want to be taking it. And the things you should be thinking about there is like, again, like, do you want to hone in on people who've participated in a program with you or bought your product? Do you care about how old people are? Do you care about where people live? Do you care about the role people have in their company, right? There are a bunch of different characteristics. The list is far longer than what I give here, but you want to be thinking about all of those things and actually list those out so that as you're writing your survey, you're thinking about those groups of people who you are hoping to get responses from. Then once you have your purpose statement, it's important to actually write down the goals. So like, why are you doing this survey in the first place? What is it that you want to learn? How are you going to use this information? Again, a lot of times this to me seems like so silly. Like, of course people are doing this. And then you look at a survey that has 25 questions on it. It's super long. It's really hard to get through and it feels unfocused. And I'm thinking like, I guess they probably didn't even think about what information they actually needed, right? Like what goals they're trying to serve with this information. And so a shortcut for this is to start with like the end in mind. Like, what is the decision you're going to want to make? What is something that you're going to want to be able to say based on the survey, right? Like that can help you inform the goals. But again, before you write any questions at all, I would write down your goals and be like, again, you have your survey purpose statement. These are the people I'm surveying, and like, these are the goals. These are the why I'm surveying these people. Goals typically fall into one of these 4 buckets. Not always, but these are the most common buckets I've seen. One goal is to collect basic information. So that's learning things like someone's contact information or prior experience they've had, their age, their race, ethnicity, gender, maybe their income level, how much education they have. You might want basic info. You might be doing a survey because you want feedback. You want someone to share the opinion they have about a product, a service. You want to learn what you're doing well or what you might be able to do better. You might want people to describe things. So tell you about an experience they had, to tell you about how confident they think they are, right? To self-assess themselves on skills, right? Just to give you like a description of the world or of themselves. Or you might have a goal to measure impact, which that's where you really want to look at the change that's occurring because of you, or evaluate like the difference that your work makes for a person or in the world. And these are kind of where I like people to start, because these categorize a lot of the things that you would want to learn from a survey. And I think it just makes it a little bit simpler to look within these groups. So as an example, I use an onboarding survey for my company, survey purpose statement, very simple. I'm collecting data from clients, right? If you're not a client, you don't need to take my survey. That's pretty quick and concise there. And the goals I have for my survey is I want basic background information. I want to understand the goals they have for their work together. I consider that basic info because that's like prior experience that I want to capture. I like to assess people's existing knowledge of survey design. And then I also like to measure their confidence in survey design, because that's something that I care about it changing or not changing as a result of our work together. So I have 4. Typically, I find like a good short survey has somewhere between 3 and 5. If you're looking at suddenly having like 11, 12 goals, I would wonder, like, are you doing a research study? So you're doing like a massive survey, or perhaps you just like not quite as focused as you need to be in order to write a good survey. But I would start by looking at these groups and seeing like which of these are like, why am I doing this survey? Like, oh, I really do want some basic info. Like, oh, maybe you just want basic info and feedback, right? Maybe you want just feedback and impact. You don't care about the basic info. You can kind of use these to guide the outline of your survey. So when you go to write the questions, you have your goals and you're brainstorming, drafting your questions within each of these buckets of goals. Any questions about writing a survey purpose statement, about goals? Do you have example goals that you want to share or ask a question about?
At what point do you determine the number of questions in the survey?
Great question. I would say, like, you have your goals, you would draft your questions within the buckets of the goals, and that should already really pare down how many questions you have, right? Because a lot of times when I go through survey drafts, I just did this with a school district the other week. They had 10 questions that didn't map to any of the goals they had, right? And I'm like, if you had just started with goals, you wouldn't have even had these extra 10 questions, right? I don't think there is a number of questions that you have to have or that you shouldn't exceed, but you want to make sure every question you're asking is serving an explicit purpose, right? So if you're starting to get redundant, like you're kind of asking the same thing again and again, too many questions, right? Or if you have any question on your list, they're like, oh, this is just kind of interesting, but it doesn't hit a goal. You don't want that. In research, where I think this can get like a little bit more complicated, is if you're measuring what we would consider a construct. So that would be something like leadership. So you have a survey and you want to measure quality of leadership. We would say that to measure the big idea of leadership, you need to ask at least 5 to 7 questions that get at leadership, right? So sometimes people are like, oh, I measured leadership and I asked this one question. And typically in research, like, you could not use just one question to measure a massive big idea. You would need at least 5 to 7 different questions that taken all together would match up with leadership. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I have one as well,
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
but I don't know if somebody else was in the queue. I was going to raise my hand, but I don't see my hand.
Let me answer this one in the chat and then.
Yeah, that was it. I saw something. Yeah. That's it. Go ahead, please.
So a lot of people say that it's like when people are like, oh, my clients are everyone. And it's like, really? You care about everyone? So I agree. I also hear that a lot. And I think then it goes to the conversation of who are like your customers, your clients, your stakeholders. And if it is genuinely everyone, which again, like it's just realistically, it's probably not, then fine, you can ask everyone. But like, even if someone said everyone, I'm like, do you want to ask children? Right? Like, do you want to ask people who live in a different country as, you know, like every country in the world, are they all eligible to take your survey? Every age, all eligible to take your survey? Like, do you care about all those things? And if you really do, like, it's okay. I think the problem is that when people say that and then they do a completely anonymous survey and collect no background information on people, it just kind of loses confidence in the quality of data you have. I did a survey in New Orleans and they wanted feedback on their school system. And they were like, anyone in the city can give feedback because everyone could potentially have kids who go to school here. And so we want everyone's feedback. And they ended up regretting not asking more about the people taking the survey because a ton of college students took the survey. And it turns out they didn't really want to make decisions about their kindergarten and first grade classrooms based on what college students from different cities had to say, right? So even when people say everyone, I think there is this thought of like, okay, so if you have literally no idea who responded, are you still going to feel confident in the data and making those decisions? Okay, is it Jose?
Yeah, I mean, I can go, or you can have.
Yeah.
There's another question on
Yeah,
the chat as well.
You are next. I'll come back to the chat.
Okay. Well, I mean, my questions are actually essentially about privacy. I mean, you were just talking about anonymized, survey, so you don't really care about, like who's answering or not. But my question is about validated data. So in that sense, questions about who is filling in a survey, it matters because, I mean, of course, if you want to extract data that it's validated, I don't want Bugs Bunny to be filling in a survey, right?
Yes.
So you want like persons to be whatever, like qualitative data. So questions about this, if you like, challenge between privacy and proof of humanity, it's something that it's concerning, especially on Web3, which is an area that I'm more dedicated, and we're actually running survey on this. So how you tackle with this problem and these dilemmas?
How do you tackle, are you asking about like the privacy features?
I mean, privacy and this proof of humanity as well.
I feel like, honestly, Wilson, you're probably going to be better able to answer that because that's like a platform aspect.
Well,
right? Have like screeners to screen out people who are not people, computers taking the survey. So
Okay, with Wilson, I have actually had this conversation. It's an ongoing conversation we have. So I'll put differently for you, how you understand that you are gathering actually good qualitative data, how you validate your data in this sense.
I mean, when it's all private and you don't know who's
Yeah,
taking it.
if it's a lot anonymized, if you get a lot of, again, Bugs Bunny, whatever, Donald Ducks and whatnot, right?
Yep.
So how you validate this?
I think to me, then it comes down to like, how are you distributing it, right? Like if it's completely anonymous and private and you just like tweet it out, that makes me nervous, right? Because you've just shared it in a way where you have no idea who's going to see it or where those people are going to come from. So I never really trust data like that unless you have like an in-depth screening process to ask them a bunch of background questions. And if they happen to be able to pass all of those, and you're a computer, then I'm so happy that you wanted to go through that much work to participate in my survey. But when I think about how I do survey design, like we're targeting people through like very specific channels. So I might not know who they are, but I'm giving it out through a specific company, right? Or I'm sending it to an anonymous link to a bunch of email addresses. So like I have a little bit of control over the sample. I think anytime so many people survey on Reddit, like in Reddit threads, it'll be like, please take my survey. That to me, like it is exceptionally difficult to trust that data because you have no idea who is clicking it, right? Like anytime something is just like released into the internet with no structure where anyone can possibly click in, that's dangerous to me. That makes me nervous about data. Last week, I got on Threads, I could have taken a survey to weigh in on Kenya's road infrastructure, which I know nothing about and should not be surveyed about. A county in Kentucky here, like what they're going to do with their parks and recreation center. Like I shouldn't even be seeing that survey, right? But that's because it's an anonymous survey and they're just tweeting it out, right? Anyone can see it. So I think some of that comes into the strategy of what are the channels you're using to collect data? Because you can get anonymous data, and if you tighten up the channels you go through, I think that makes it much more trustworthy. I don't know, Wilson, if you want to add anything from a
No, this is great. Thanks for adding, Kirsten. We have also seen strategies when we do studies. I've seen businesses building up their list first, even before rolling out their main survey. They're just creating qualifying questionnaires on the first survey, onboarding them, and then seeing are they real audience? Are they the right candidates to participate in the study or the research? And then they're rolling out the second survey, the actual survey to the audience they have gathered. So I've seen that is more like a very controlled study, controlled experiment, so that brings in quality data. But a truly anonymous survey, just directly going out there on socials, it's certainly, if there are incentives involved, there is going to be a lot of spam coming in. It's very difficult to prevent.
Yeah.
But I've also seen there are unique features with it. This is mostly from the platform point of view. The gating is coming in every network, meaning you can collect social identities, be it Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn. So you can ask them to sign in to participate in the study. So which means, even the social profiles, so you're kind of preventing spam, encouraging them to disclose, could be pseudo identity on Twitter or Reddit. But then that is one way to also prevent a little bit spam. And also, a little bit of your audience demographic through their social profiles.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Dave, I see you have two questions. So the first question is about response rates. And this is, I hate giving this answer, but like, it depends, right? So like, if you have 1,000 people that you've surveyed, you could have taken a survey and only 3% respond, is it useful? And it's like, to me, it depends, right? Like I wouldn't throw out that data because only 3% of people responded. But when I'm interpreting it or using it to make a decision, it would definitely be in my mind that only 3% of people responded. And part of what would make that 3% count more or less than me is how closely they represent the rest of the organization, right? Like, is the 3% only leadership that responded? Whereas like you actually wanted to get information from like every level of an organization? I would interpret that differently. Like, was the 3% all people who shared the same gender? You might think differently about that, right? So it kind of depends on other qualities of the people who are participating. I know that when we do family or community surveys, people are usually ecstatic to get 5 to 7% response rates, which are like low. That's not a very high response rate. Like, even in research, people are like, I can't believe we had 7% of families respond. Like, that's so great. So it really varies based on the field you're in. And again, based on like the makeup of those people who are participating. And like, my personal opinion is always just be transparent. Like, if you do this and it's only 3% of people, don't pretend like it was 80% of people, or like make it sound like this is definitely true for the whole organization because it was only 3%, right? But there are, if you're doing like more advanced statistical analyses, like there are calculators online that you can do to be like, if I want to have 95% confidence that what I found is true, how many people do I need to take my survey? And like, they can do the math for you on that. With regard to your other question, I would say no. Well, like, it depends, right? Wilson and I have talked about this a few times. Like, I love closed option questions because they are much more quick to analyze. So in my opinion, if you're going to do an open-ended question where people can write in whatever they want, one, you need to know that there is a right way and a wrong way to analyze written data, right? Like, people study qualitative analysis in depth for many years to get a knack for that. I know that there's some work with AI to do some qualitative analysis that's getting better. But generally for me, if it's something that could be closed, I would ask it as a close. Not necessarily yes, no, but I would have people choose options any day of the week over a written response, especially if once you get high response numbers. Like, looking at 1,000 paragraphs that people have typed in is a lot to do. And I find that a lot of people are easily like, I don't like accidentally, not accidentally go in and they just pull out like the most interesting things people said. That's not how qualitative findings work, right? So you would really have to do the work to analyze responses if you did it open-ended. So I don't think it's the quickest route, but again, it really depends on what you want to learn. I have a few friends who are qualitative researchers, and they're very like, I could only learn this through a qualitative response. And it's like, okay, that's great. A statistically valid sampling as opposed to anecdotal from random. I mean, I'm assuming you're using the word like random casually, because like random is really like the best, right? Like, people love randomization in terms of having people take your survey, because a randomly selected sample is actually considered superior to something that is not randomly selected. So statistically valid sampling would be like a bunch of things, but part of it would be like how many people, it would be how were the people selected. It might just, those two would probably be the key things to pay attention to, is how many people and how they were selected, right? Because you could do convenience sampling, which would just be like sending a survey to people you know and asking them to send it to people that they know, right? Or you could do an effort where you're randomly selecting people to take your survey, or you could be trying to find like a nationally representative sample. So there's a bunch of different ways to choose people for your survey. And there's no single way that is like statistically valid. A lot of times statistics look better the more people you have. Like, that's just how the math works out. So going for bigger numbers is typically what's advised. And personally, like, that's just in such contradiction to most of the organizations I work with, where they have very small numbers, right? Like, they're piloting an idea very early stage. So they're not trying to survey like 10,000 people. They're trying to survey 20 people, right? So is that great from a statistical perspective? No, but that doesn't mean that it's like bad data or not useful data.
But until like when you're doing 20, it's like a focus group more. That's more a qualitative approach, I would say, you know?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't love doing focus groups because it's harder to control, right? Like, I would actually rather survey 20 people than do a focus group, because with the surveys, I can be really careful about the response choices I give. I know everyone's seeing the exact same questions. Everyone has an opportunity to weigh in. Whereas focus groups, when I do those, they just have like more of an X factor, right? Like some people don't get an opportunity to talk. Some people talk way too much. When I do one focus group, I don't get through all the same questions I do in the other focus group. So it's more difficult to control that environment. So I love doing surveys, even with small groups. And then if I want to like really dig in deep on a particular survey finding, then I honestly would probably do a one-on-one interview over a focus group just because I like those better. But to me, the benefit of surveying is the amount of control you have, right? Like you're making sure everyone is seeing the exact same questions, right? Like everyone has an opportunity to respond in the same way. And you don't get that with focus groups or interviews because there's just, when you're having that more interactive conversation, things don't always go the same way, which is fine. But if you want to get like really systematic, quick data, I would say even if it was like 5 people, I would survey them, right? Like it's quicker and a little bit more efficient. If you want really
Okay.
deep data, like I want you to tell me the story about why you picked this product, I would not do that in a survey, right? Because it's going to be like a really big paragraph. That seems like it's better for a conversation. But if I want people to rate features or tell me about what they would be most or least interested in learning about, I'm always going to survey, even if it's like 5 people. I taught a course a couple weeks ago and there were 3 people. I surveyed them. I'm not going to do a focus group with them, right? I was like, I'll just send them a survey and then 3 people can take it. And it's just like an easy way to get data.
No, yeah, that's for sure. Yes, I agree. In that sense, and it's there.
Yeah.
You can just like archive it and then you can, like just go back on it.
Yeah,
It's easier to
absolutely.
manage. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So 30 people attended an event and 10 people responded. Yeah, I mean, again, like response rates to me are just like, I wouldn't get too hung up on them. It's just context for interpreting your data, right? So like to me, when you're reporting data, just always be transparent. It's like, look, like 30 people came, 10 people responded. This is what they said. And then typically we say things like, here's what we know about the 10 people who responded, if you know any information about them, right? Because that could also add like further context to your data. Because really, I'm not a fortune teller, right? Like I can't see the future. 2 more people could take the survey and the data could not change at all, right? It could exactly map on to what the previous 10 people said. So I wouldn't worry too much about response rates other than like strive to get as high as you can and just don't ever lie about it to people. Because there are so many, especially in like the market research field, places where like if they even tell you the response rate, it's like so tiny. Even like the number of people, like there was a shampoo ad I saw the other day and they did like a clinical trial and it was only on 10 people. And I'm like, I'm gonna be honest, like I think for only having had 10 people try your shampoo, you're overstating the findings, right? Like and you're hiding the fact that it was only 10 people. So I think just being mindful of how many people you have and like what conclusions you feel comfortable drawing from that is important. But I personally, like, I never throw out data. I'm never like, oh, this is useless because only this many people responded. The only time I ever get nervous about low numbers is if suddenly something can become identifiable and I've told you it's anonymous, right? So sometimes when we're surveying in schools, for example, if we only have 5 teachers in grade 1 take a survey, we won't report those results because it could be too easy to tell from their answers who those 5 teachers are. Even though it's anonymous, people might be able to figure it out. So that's the only time I care about a low number is if it's putting someone's identity at risk. And I've said, hey, this is confidential, this is anonymous, no one's going to know. Then I'm worried about it being a low number and I might throw that data out, or I might decide like, okay, we can't look at it by grade. We have to look at it by like the entire school instead because the responses were too low. But that's not because I think the data is bad. That's because I want to protect the privacy of people who participated.
But how you guarantee this privacy from the go? Because people need to identify themselves. Again, it's a more of a platform issue again, but how you pass this trust issue? It's a trust issue ultimately.
Oh, totally. I mean, most of the surveys I do are not anonymous. We say they're confidential, right? Because at the end of the day, like I emailed it to you, your email's tied to your response. I know you took it. So I'm very much in the confidential camp. I'm like, I'm going to know this is your response, but I'm not going to put your name anywhere. And people just kind of have to trust that that's true. And
Okay.
I think it's something where if you do it, you want like to build long-term relationships with people. So you don't want to do it and then not honor it. I was at a conference a couple years ago and they said the survey was anonymous. And then afterwards, the leader came to talk to me about my responses. And I never answered another survey of theirs, like to this day. I won't participate in any other surveys. So I'm like, you said it was anonymous, and yet you came knowing exactly what my response was to talk to me about it, right? Like the trust was just so completely burned for me that I was like, no, no, no.
And you are in the US, correct? You work essentially
Yeah.
with the US market. So GDPR doesn't really apply.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do.
yeah.
I will say that I work with my lawyers to align with GDPR for my business because I mean, it's a better standard, but the
No,
US
yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Naturally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I do know. I mean, here in Europe, we should have a bit, at least the statements, you know, like some of the disclosures, so on and so forth.
Yep.
Yeah, but I know it's a different ballgame in that sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The US
Yeah.
is very lax about things like that.
Yes, 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 yes. We know that.
Unfortunately.
Yes, yes. And how can you compete? This is another question, you know, like you were just mentioning. We have so many surveys out there, so many companies out there. It's different, of course, you know, like if you have a tailor, then we mentioned this, I'm taking this data sampling. It's extremely important. I mean, Wilson was also mentioning this, right? How you work from your data from the go. And, you know, like either from your client is giving you the data, so you already know what you're building on, or, you know, like build up the data in order then to execute your own like service on top of that. But if you want to compete, like you have a client that says, hey, just test my shampoo like in an open market. What techniques can you recommend in order for your survey in this open market to surface for people to take it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So from a design standpoint, to me, like you want to have a like quick, like an easy breezy survey design, right? Like the minute I open a survey and the question is like confusing, or I don't know what answer to pick, or it seems like it's going to be really long, like I'm not taking it, right? And that's actually no issue with targeting people or finding people. It's like now you've brought people here and they don't want to take your survey because it's bad, right? Like, so you want to have a good user experience. That's one of the things that I like about block surveys. I think it just like even visually, it displays questions better than other platforms, which increases the likelihood that someone will take your survey, right? TikTok Shop was doing a survey a couple weeks ago, and there were typos in their questions. Like it was just like such a weird, bizarre, like the answer choices were all over the place. And I'm like, who's going to take this, right? Because even if you get the notification, you click in, you see how poorly executed it's been and you're not going to take it, right? I think having the design will help with follow through. And then the two other things I think, one is you can always explore the option of like incentives, right? I think people are getting much more like, I want something in exchange for my like time and opinion, especially if you're asking me for more than 5 minutes of my time. So are there any incentives that you can offer to people? Is it a discount on your product? Is it that they get the product before everyone else? Like to incentivize participation? I think that is also super helpful. And the last thing is kind of like the follow through, because I find that people like they give you their time and like their expertise, they take your survey, and then nothing ever happens with the data. Like they don't hear that they've used, like you've used it, they don't see any changes in your product. And it's kind of like, why did I even do this for you? What a waste of time, right? So again, it's like thinking about building a relationship with the people that you're surveying, right? Because if you sorry, my dog heard your dog, whoever's that was. Ken. He just loves other dogs. So thinking of like, how can you push back that information so people know that you used it, right? Like, can it be in an ad campaign? You'd be like, hey, like 75% of people said we should do this, so we're doing this. Like even something really simple like that. Now, next time I want to take your survey because I want you to change your product in this way. And I know that you're actually listening to what people say. So I think that there's making sure you have good design. So if you get people there, you don't lose them. Making sure you have incentives if you can afford that, and then making sure that you're following through, because it's not just about this one survey. It's unlikely that you'll only ever want feedback from your customers one time in the entire lifespan of your product or your company. It's about showing them, hey, we value your feedback and here's what we did with it. So like next time we come and ask you, please answer our question again.
Yeah, definitely.
And this goes the same with organization as well, right? If organization running internal surveys could be employee engagement, if they
Yep.
set this expectation, even if there are low response rates, we should be able to get to a considerable response rate. These strategies should work. Is that right, Kirsten?
Yeah. The other thing that organizations kind of have in their back pocket, which again, like some pros, some cons to this, but when you start like when you hire someone or like if you're working with a contractor at the outset of the contract, you can set the expectation that like, hey, part of this job is taking surveys, right? It's kind of like carrot or stick. And at the end of the day, like if you're an employer, it can be like, hey, part of working here is that every week you fill out a feedback survey. If you knowing that, if you still want to work here, great. If you don't, like, bye, because feedback is really important to us. And I've worked with a few companies who've gone that route because they're like, actually, we just want a culture of data. So I don't want to be begging people to take our survey every time. I'd rather say up front, hey, you're joining the team. Here's part of the expectations of your role. One of the expectations, you're going to take this survey however often. And I'm not opposed to that. There are some people who are like, don't like that, right? Because it's using the stick instead of a carrot. But I think that if you're trying to really build a data-driven culture, you can do that from the outset. I don't think you can hire someone without that expectation and then be like, you're going to be fired if you don't take our survey. Like that would be bad. But if at the outset of a relationship, you said, this is part of the gig, right? Everyone takes these surveys. We want this feedback. It's really important to us. And they agree to it, then that's okay. I see that oftentimes with funders because they want to collect data from the people they're giving money to. And now they'll write it into the contract. It's like, hey, if you take this $1 million in funding from us, you have to fill out these forms every 6 months. And that's the deal. If you don't want the $1 million, don't sign the contract, don't do the forms, but you sign them. If you do this, you're going to be doing the forms. And I think that's okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, but that's borderline reporting to a certain extent. And let me highlight a little bit like block survey, because you can actually pseudo-anonymize like all this. You can just distribute the wallet like to the surveyees in this sense, so people are comfortable to provide like the feedback. Because if you are in a corporate environment, you can say, hey, I cannot actually like talk shit, about my boss or my C-level or whoever is running my department, because you actually are identifying yourself. But if you have ways like block survey is providing, that you can pseudo-anonymize like your answers, then like you're free like to provide whichever answers you can give, provide reasonable data for the company or corporation that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think it's great. Like I've also seen a lot of companies move towards using like third parties, like they don't survey their employees, someone else surveys their employees. And it is towards that idea of like they want the anonymous data. So people feel comfortable saying, hey, my boss sucks. And like their company will never know because they're actually taking the survey for someone else over here that feeds the data in. So yeah, I think anything that allows you to like walk the line between I want to track who's taking the survey so I know I have your insights, but I want the data to be anonymous. That's the best of both worlds, right? Because I don't need to know your exact response. I just want to know if you even took the survey. Awesome. Okay, we only have 5 more minutes left. So I'm going to skip some slides, but Wilson can send these to you. Once you have goals, you want to make them into something a little bit more specific. Like to me, a goal is not measurable. I call them shareables. Like you would take your goal and you would translate it into like the exact stat or sentence you would want to share. And that will really help you inform the question you want to write. And again, this kind of goes back to the idea of survey length and like, am I asking too many questions? Am I asking the right questions? If you think about what you want to know at the end, very specifically, you're just not going to run into as many problems there because you've been following this map to ensure that you are getting the exact data that you want. I always say like, this is probably an American thing, but you want to think Alice in Wonderland, which is where you shrink down very small versus the quote from Jaws where you're like, we need a bigger boat. Like you never need a bigger boat in surveys, always small, just think very small. From the shareables, you could go into writing your questions. And we already talked about this a little bit, deciding between open-ended and closed-ended questions, deciding the type of scale that you want to use. Block survey is great. It has a lot of these like already in there. So you can just look at different options. And then the final piece of advice I will leave you with is always pilot your survey, right? So like we do something in research called doing cognitive labs. And it's even if you can only find one person to do this with, I would say it's worth it. But you have someone take your survey in front of you and they read it out loud. They tell you exactly how they're thinking to answer each question. It is the most valuable information I have ever gotten in any survey. And I think it's really hard to design a bad survey if you have done this, because you'll quickly know like, wow, people don't understand what I asked at all. These answer categories are terrible. I'm missing an answer choice that I need to have. It will just become very readily apparent. This is something that when you do formal research, you always have to go through this step, and it is often skipped more in the private sector, but would highly recommend doing that. And again, this is about understanding how people are understanding your questions. You really want to figure out, is this confusing? Do you know the words? Are these the right answer choices? If you're giving them a list, is something missing from this list? Yes, Dave, we can definitely send you the slides. So that and
Okay.
testing the survey in the platform, right? Because things happen. Sometimes people put their survey in the platform and then they're like, actually, I want to ask this in a completely different way, because now that I'm seeing it exactly how other people see it, I might want to do it differently. You might realize there are typos. You might realize that you didn't force a response that you want to force. It's funny how many surveys go live with so many issues where I'm like, they must not have tested it at all, because they would have noticed.
Uh,
Yeah.
No. It's I thought you were just talking about my survey.
Oh,
No.
yeah. So, test your survey out. It's very helpful.
I mean, we do, but sometimes you just like, it's an organic thing, okay?
Yes. And
No,
then
I'm joking. It's just a joke.
we have a feedback survey for this workshop that I just put in the chat, and we can also send you, which would be like, one, great if you take it. It is anonymous. I'll have no idea who took it. But two, it also gives you an example of like what a survey can look at and what different questions options are. So even if you don't want to take it, you can look at it. And in terms of additional resources, I'm doing a special block survey for my longer course. I do offer survey reviews, and I have a book coming out on September 19th on how to write surveys that I'm really excited about, because it's only a few
That's
weeks
good.
from now. Yeah, I'm excited. It's super.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Congrats on
Thank
that already.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. I'm looking
So,
forward to see that as well. Okay, cool.
yeah, I'm
It's going
really
back a bit
excited.
into my old life. Okay, that's nice. Quick
It's
question on this, actually. What
Yeah,
is
please.
the time frame for us to answer your survey now?
My survey, 1 week. Why? Because I think after a week, you're not going to remember that much about how this went.
This was my point, because usually you have, well, that was the question. When people are experiencing an event,
Yeah,
and you want either like a quick shot on it, or you want like 2 days, you want people to mature, blah, 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 blah. You have also some rationale behind this. For sure.
proximity. Yeah. If you all were
Yeah,
doing like, if we were at a conference and we were doing like 20 sessions back, I'd probably be like, okay, last 5 minutes, people just have to do it right now, because otherwise, to your point, proximity is important. I like to do a week just because sometimes people open them and take half of it and forget for a few days, which is fine. But yeah,
depends.
timing's important.
No, and again, it depends. You might want actually people to take 1 or 2 days to mature, and then like they think, they whatever, compare, and then actually you want day 2 of their thinking,
So
and not
true.
day 1. Like it depends again. But yeah, I take your point.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, thank you all so much.
Very nice. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten, everyone
Thank
who
you.
joined the meeting today. Kirsten, I learned a ton. I'm sure the members from the community would have got great insights on how to do the survey design. We are super glad that you could come and share your knowledge with us. I appreciate you for sharing with us. Thank you so much. It's going to be
Yeah.
impactful. I'm sure our next surveys would be obviously going to be much better from here on. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing.
Okay. I
Thank you,
wish you a
everyone.
pleasant day. Yeah.
We'll see you again with another session sometime in the coming months. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
participating.
you.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and have a wonderful launch of the book.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.